Hereby, I open the academic ceremony in which Alfonso Aranda will defend his academic thesis titled Artificial Intelligence for Electrocardiography, Applications to Vectorcardiography in Myocardial Infarction. Dear candidate, may I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Pro-Rector. Dear guests, friends, committee members, I'm honest to be here, and I would like to share with you all the work I've been doing in my PhD thesis about artificial intelligence and detection of myocardial infarction using BCG. So what's myocardial infarction? Myocardial infarction is a blockage of one of the coronary arteries of the heart, and this will produce a lack of flow of oxygen and blood to part of the heart muscle, and this therefore will damage the heart muscle. And this is a big problem and is a leading cause of mortality worldwide. So MI is a huge burden for society and healthcare systems, also for patients. And early detection is critical. And why is critical early detection? Basically, it's critical because the sooner we detect MI, the sooner we can put those patients under treatment, and the better the prognosis and the less comorbidity for those patients as a result of the event. One of the ways to diagnose MI or do early diagnosis of MI is electrocardiogram. And the problem with electrocardiogram is that it requires a lot of expertise, so expert interpretation, and this is not all the times available in a clinical setting. Especially this is true for emerging countries where they don't have access to the well-trained cardiologists that we have in the developed world. As we said, ECG is electrocardiography is one of the ways to diagnose MI. And you can see what electrocardiography is. Basically, it's a set of electrodes in the body, in the chest of the patient, that are capturing the activity, heart activity, of the different phases of the heart. However, this is not the only way to capture and represent heart activity. Vectorcardiography is another way in which we can do that. And this is an old way. So, I mean, this was proposed by Frank in the early 50s. And what you get basically is like 3 signals, as you see there on the right, top right, X, Y, and Z. And those signals, you can reconstruct those signals in the 3-dimensional space and get these kind of loops in the space. It has been shown that vectorcardiography is good and can be better than electrocardiography for the detection of MI. However, requires a special clinical setting for that. So the good thing is that we can synthesize BCG from the standard 12-lead ECG. Basically, why we would like to do that is because there is a lot of 12-lead ECG data out there that we can leverage for the detection of MI if we can synthesize and get BCG from a standard 12-lead ECG. Also, the clinical practice, they have the standard 12-lead ECG. So if we want to get this implemented in the clinical practice, we have to start with the 12-lead ECG. So therefore, it's really important to synthesize BCG from 12-lead ECG. There are different ways to do that, but the most known ones are Dover's inverse transform and coarse transform. And basically, this will take the 12-lead ECG and transform into a vectorcardiography. Therefore, the thesis motivation is to improve automatic detection and localization of MI, evaluate how good is BCG to do that, and also to validate the synthesized BCG. Even more, if we want to apply this to do early detection, then we need to translate all this into a continuous monitoring system so we can detect the condition in those patients, the sooner the better. However, to do that, we need a reduced lead system, so we did some research on that, and also a reliable set of features that will be robust against noise and artifacts in the signal. So when the patients are walking around or doing daily activities, they will have muscle noise, they will go through antennas, they will get EMI, and all these kind of things. Okay, so it's critical to have a robust set of features for that. And finally, it's also very important to do MI localization. So to localize the area where MI is occurring so we can treat the patient the sooner. So the challenge we address in the thesis are MI detection using synthesized BCG. So we do automatic continuous monitoring of MI So we propose a reduced lead ECG system, as well as we develop a new set of parameters for robust detection against noise and artifacts. And finally, we tackle the problem of MI localization. So talking about automatic detection, so when we have the synthesized BCG, we have this kind of loops, but if we want to train a model with that, we have to get some features from that. So we can try to pre-process this for the model that is able to learn properly. So then the features we can extract from that are geometrical. So this represents characteristics of the loop, like the perimeter, the area, and so on. And then we have spatiotemporal features. So spatiotemporal features are how those loops are distributed on the space and over time. Then, for validating the synthesized BCG, what we use is a database that is called PTV diagnostic database, in which we have MI patients and also other kind of patients in which we have healthy controls, ventricular hypertrophy, Van der Waals block, and any other diseases. So the good thing of this database is that we have both. So we have the standard 12-lead ECG and the Frank's BCG. So therefore, we can validate the synthesized and the Frank BCG. So then what we did is we used those signals in there. So we have the gold standard, that is Frank's BCG. And then from the standard 12-lead ECG, we synthesize both the vectorcardiography using both Dovers and coarse transforms. Then we extract a set of BCG features, so geometrical and spatiotemporal features. We apply a classification model. And then we compare the performance on those models. And we saw that there were no statistical difference in the performance on the three models. So what indicates that synthesized BCG is as suitable as Frank BCG as the gold standard to detect MI. Then what we did now, so when we are synthesizing BCG, we are downsampling the signal. So we move from 12-lead ECG into a 3-lead ECG system. So we had concerns that by doing that, we might have some loss of information that would help in the detection of MI. Therefore, what we did in that case, we used the same database, the PTV database, but in that case, what we did is we created a new vectorcardiography using a multidimensional vectorcardiography. So taking the 12-lead and then making kind of hyperspace vectorcardiography and compare with Dover's and Frank's BCG to see if there is any improvement in the detection of MI. Then we did as before, so we got a set of ECG features, we apply a classification method, and then we obtain same thing. So we didn't see any significant difference on those, between those three methods. What indicates that by adding more leads, we are not improving detection, so we don't really need those many leads. Then this brings us to the next point, so about automatic MI continuous monitoring. So if we don't need all those leads, so we don't need the multidimensional vectorcardiography, and we know that for the continuous monitoring, we need a reduced lead ECG system, the question was, can we reduce even more the number of leads? So can we do a vectorcardiography instead of using the 12-lead ECG as a base, using a subset of those 12-lead ECG? So what we did then is we apply brute force, and we looked into when we have 12 leads or 12 elements and we do combinations of 3, we have 220 combinations. Okay, so what we did is we validated and we tested all those combinations, and we came up with the best possible system that was the one you see here, using B1, B3, and lead 3. In that case, the system, the performance was comparable to the performance we had before, and therefore, indeed, was possible and is possible to detect MI with good accuracy using only 3 leads. But as we mentioned in the beginning, so it's not only about having a reduced lead ECG system, it's also having a robust set of features that will enable us to do a reliable detection of MI. And for that, what we did is we used the reduced ECG lead system. We got the vectorcardiography feature, but now we did something else. So now we applied a dynamic window. And in this dynamic window, what we have is we look into statistical parameters. Okay, so we have the window, and then we look standard deviation, kurtosis, skewness, and other kind of statistical parameters. And then we follow this over time. So we can see when there is a change in the trends of those vectorcardiography features for the detection of MI. So having these distribution features, then what we need now is a good model for doing the longitudinal prediction. So now we have those distribution features over time, and then we want to know when MI is happening, or if there is MI. And for doing that, we apply a longitudinal model from deep learning that is called recurrent neural networks. And to improve generalizability on those models, because they tend to overfit, we propose a new criterion to control the number of features that we put into the model. And after doing that, we look into the positive predictive value and negative predictive value, and we saw the model was performing without excessive false alarm rates in that case. That is something we care about when we are doing continuous monitoring. Then about the MI localization, then one we can detect in a continuous monitoring setting and detect MI, then we have to localize. So we want to know where the MI is happening. And for that, we use the two databases, the PTV-XL in blue, as you see there, and the PTV Diagnostics in green. And in that case, it's worth mentioning that this task is much more challenging than the other before. So before, we were discriminating between MI and non-MI. So, and those are kind of different patients and different populations. But now we have patients with MI, so the same population, and then the MI is in a different region. So it's not that we have more classes, but also the difference between classes is more subtle. Okay? So it's a more challenging problem to solve. So in that case, we did the same. So we derived the Dover's inverse transform. So we got the BCG from Dover's. We got the features. And here we did something new as well. So in that case, what we did is we applied an autoencoder. And we were concerned with the training phase and the learning and generalizability. So we thought the autoencoder, because we are smoothing the feature space with the autoencoder, will facilitate training and improve the performance of the model and also generalizability. So after the autoencoder, then we put those features into different models with different level of complexity and evaluated how the complexity was affecting the effect of the autoencoder. And this is the results up there. You see the results on the training and validation dataset, so the blue dataset that we had before. And you can appreciate that the autoencoder in blue, compared to the baseline with autoencoder in gray, is not improving much in this case. Also, you can see that the more complex model, so GBM, gradient boosting, is the one that is performing the best. However, when we go to the independent validation dataset, the things are flipping, it's changing, okay? So now we see that the autoencoder is really adding to the detection in the simple model. SVM, super vector matchings, is still adding, it's more complex, but still adding to the detection, to the localization of MI, sorry. But the gradient boosting is the one that is performing the worst. So overall, we see that autoencoder is improving generalizability in those simple models and making the more simple model the best in the independent validation dataset, which is important. So this brings us to the thesis contribution. So as contributions, we validated the synthesized BCG as feasible for evaluating and detecting and localizing MI. So we developed and proposed a new set of methods for detection and localization of MI. We propose a reduced lead system for continuous monitoring settings. Also, we propose a new set of parameters for that are robust against noise and artifacts. And then we use an autoencoder to smooth the feature space, and this was proven to improve models' generalizability. On top of that, the methods we propose are explainable. So this means that the features that we get can be translated to the clinical practice and has a physiological meaning. So we can derive from those features a physiological meaning. Sorry. So thank you for listening. And with that, I give the word back to the prorector. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Before we proceed with the opposition, let me briefly introduce this committee to the audience. So on my opposite left, we have Dr. Bonizzi, Dr. Caro, Professor Peters, Professor Vos and Professor Volders. On this side, we have Dr. Zagogianni, Dr. Kevel, the secretary of this committee. And online, we are accompanied by Professor Guillem from Spain. Finally, my name is Thuisman, and I'm the pro-rector for this meeting. Now, you're going to have to answer some questions, and the opposition will be opened by Professor Volders. Professor Volders is a professor of genetic cardiology at Maastricht University Medical Center, and he is the chair of the assessment committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, congratulations with a thesis on electrocardiography. You know where you defended in the University of Maastricht. There's many examples of people who were here before you who had quite some knowledge of the ECG or the electrocardiogram, including one of my supervisors sitting next to me. I think it's an important work, and yet I also try to picture it in the clinical setting, in the clinical practice. Imagine you're a 57-year-old male coming to the emergency department with acute chest pain, where there is one aim, and that is to treat the patient, preferably with PCI, within the hour. And then there is Dr. Aranda Hernández, who would like to do VCG to detect the MI, because that's what you were telling us, to detect the MI. How would you position in that acute phase the role of vectorcardiography as a starter without annoying the emergency personnel with the delay it takes to get these recordings?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. So I would position VCG in that case, so we could extract still the 12-lead ECG, and then we will apply the synthesized VCG to get VCG. And then we will apply the models, and the good thing of the models we are proposing is MI, if it is early, we will see changes over time, okay? So we can characterize those changes over time on this patient and get early diagnosis on the patient. Other way would be to do also a lab test, cardiac troponins, and wait more time. But this will give us a range of between 6 to 8 hours to treat the patient. Mm-hmm. So if with vectorcardiography we have early diagnosis and early data telling, okay, there is something going on with the patient, then we can do more extensive testing, try to localize with vectorcardiography, where it is, and then try to intervene, or do echo to confirm, or other kind of approaches, but at least get the early detection. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, the resident will tell you, oh, here's the literature, and I can see from the ECG, 12-lead ECG, that is an inferior wall myocardial infarction, and the likely location of the culprit lesion is in the proximal right coronary artery, or anywhere else in the coronary system. Mm-hmm. So I ask my question again, what is then the added value of the VCG that you propose in the constraints of time until PCI?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. It's a very relevant and very good question indeed. Not easy question, but yeah, I will try to answer the best. So yeah, I think I agree. So the clinical personnel looking into the 12-lead ECG to detect MI in the inferior region can look into lead ST elevation in lead 2 and lead 3. And then if there is ST elevation, then they can say, okay, it's MI in inferior wall. However, sometimes the changes, are happening over time, and when the resident is looking into this, maybe the ST elevation is still small, it's not above the threshold proposed in the clinical setting. With this method, we can see this increasing, we can see the trend going up, and then we can, therefore, get a more strong evidence that there is MI going on.
Right. So the continuous monitoring is an important theme in your thesis, and I appreciate that because it is really relevant for learning better to understand what's happening in the acute phase of ischemia, as well as when infarction is settling, so to say, in the tissue. Yet the intervention of PCI is aimed at preventing all of that. So in essence, when you treat the culprit lesion in the proximal RCA, then it's fine to continue monitoring with VCG. But then in the end of the day, what you see is probably the resumption of electrophysiological stability rather than dynamic changes. Mm-hmm. So would you then agree with me that it is particularly relevant to do the continuous monitoring in the setting that the culprit cannot be treated, or when there is a missed infarction, or when it's too late, or all of these things? Or would there still be a role for VCG even in the acute setting when PCI is successful?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's, again, a very good question. So I agree that maybe the real value in the clinical setting is not as much as when, for example, we have angina pectoris in the patient, and this is going on, so the patient is discharged home, okay? But we might be concerned that the patient at home might have the attack, and then we can put the system. And maybe in this case, this is more relevant to have the continuous monitoring than in the acute setting. Yeah, I agree.
Right. And how do you see continuous monitoring there? That means the patient will stay in the hospital with all the leads that you like to see on board, or do you go back to the patient 6 times a day to make another recording? How do you see that?
Yeah, so that's a very good question again. So,
thank you.
Yeah, let me think. Yeah, I see when I envision this continuous monitoring with the reduced ECG lead system, I envision the system with those ECG patches that can do wireless transmission to a phone. Mm-hmm. Okay? Okay. Then the patient will have the phone, and if there is anything going on, there will be some processing, some system in the phone doing this modeling and saying, okay, something is going on. And then it can either advise the patient to go to the hospital, trigger an alarm to the doctor, but I don't envision this like having the patient in the hospital occupying a bed, and we know that hospital resources are scarce, so scarce. So I see more like discharging the patient home with this system. We are confident that if something happened with the patient, the system will detect and we will get the alarm and the diagnosis.
Yeah, I share your interest in the continuous monitoring, and then we should probably go further in the discussion afterwards to see how that could work practically. I understood from the prorector that I have 9 minutes, so my final question would be on another topic, and that is electroanatomical imaging. So you propose a method by which, from the electrocardiogram, although you call it correctly so, a vectorcardiography, the detection, the localization, maybe the age of the infarct, and you also help us with continuous monitoring. There is techniques out there that couple any of the ECG information directly to the anatomical substrate, and that is particularly relevant for those people who have a different size of the heart, or an old infarct, or known to have fibrosis in the myocardiums, for instance, based on MRI. So all these aspects of anatomical structural imaging connected to the ECG and bundled into a technique called, for instance, ECG imaging, by the way, a technique sold by your company, could be very interesting and relevant, maybe even superior to the proposal that you have. Can you give me a brief answer as to how you see the, let's say, the comparison for VCG versus these electroanatomical connections?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, that's a very good question again. So, so let me think. Yeah, I think imaging offers a different modality. Okay, so it's offering orthogonal information. So in that sense, I think there is value. So if we can do imaging in the patient, we characterize the patient, whether there is fibrosis or other kind of things on the patient, we can correct the modeling or weight the model in a different way. So this could be additional input, orthogonal information to do a better diagnosis on the patient. So I think I see this like a added value to the continuous monitoring, even though imaging is kind of static, so we do at one time, but then we have kind of a baseline of the patient, and then we can follow.
Thank you. I give the word back to the prorector.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. The opposition will now be continued online by Professor Guillaume, who is a professor of electronical engineering at the Polytechnical University of Valencia. Professor Guillaume, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Alfonso, for your presentation and for the discussion you've gone through already. I really enjoyed reading your thesis, and I do have a few questions and comments that I would like you to comment on. So at the first main chapter of your thesis, you have compared the performance of different transforms for computing the vectorcardiogram and compare with Frank's vectorcardiogram. I think it's very relevant in the setting of myocardial infarction that has not been investigated in the past because most studies have agreed on having coarse transform as better to Dowers transform, but they have not investigated myocardial infarction case. But if I understand correctly from your database, you investigated all myocardial infarctions and not acute myocardial infarction. So can you speculate on whether this would be applicable to acute myocardial infarction as well?
Yeah, highly esteemed opponent. Thank you for the question. I think, let me think. Indeed, this kind of modeling, when we do the PTB diagnostic database in which we have already MI, so it's not acute setting, so we don't have an evolution on MI, then the parameters are more established. So, and then the detection, I think, can be more reliable in the sense that we have already elevated parameters in the patient. So this kind of modeling still I see relevant in the acute setting for the detection of MI in the acute setting. But I agree, this is more like a more static view. One we have, after some hours, we have MI already in the patient, and then we see the performance on these models on detecting this condition. But those models are not necessarily applicable to the acute setting condition. This is more when we have already MI, we have elevated parameters, and then, yeah.
Right, because the electrocardiographic features are different during the acute phase and when there's an old myocardial infarction, so that's why, I wanted to speculate on the use, because later on you apply also the right vectorcardiogram in the case for acute myocardial infarction, but then you don't have the Frank's VCG to compare, which is what you have with the PTB database. So, but still. Maybe it's not very feasible to compare in a patient during the acute myocardial infarction phase, and this is difficult to assess. And also, regarding these results for the comparison between different transforms, you derive your results based on the metrics that you also derive, but the metrics that you apply, or the combination of metrics that you apply for Dowers transform and coarse transform are different. So do you think that having the same parameters applied to both transform would lead to similar results, or do you think that it will also have an impact?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. It's a very good question and relevant indeed. So the Dowers inverse transform, the coefficients of the matrix are determined based on morphology assumptions. So when Dowers were researching this kind of synthesization, he looked more into morphology parameters and how those, the Frank lead system, how it was similar to the 12-lead and then the matrix transformation, taking those things into account, more morphology on patients. While the course is a different approach. So course, what did is he took a bunch of data sets with all kind of comorbidities, healthy patients and everything. And then he did a regression technique to come up with the coefficients in the matrix. Therefore, yeah, those methods are different, and the vectorcardiography they generate is different. It's not exactly the same. However, I think that they basically are transforming the same information, the standard 12-lead TCG. And of course, there will be some variability, but still when we put those vectorcardiography and those features into models, we will see that still the performance is, or should be, equally well. I'm not saying that would be the same, there would be differences, but but I think overall they will perform in a similar way. But of course there will be difference also with the Frank, and in the research we did, we saw that when looking into the features selected by the different methods, by the front-lead ECG, coarse, and Dovers, we saw they were not selecting exactly the same features. There were, from the 8 features that we were selecting, I think there were 3 in common between the 3 vectorcardiographies, and then the different ones were selecting different features. So this means that they are not having the same information. However, they were having the similar performance in classification. So yeah, not sure if I answered your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Also, you have evaluated or studied the effect of multiple leads for deriving the vectorcardiogram, and you kind of come up with with an answer that having just 3 leads derived from the 12-lead ECG is enough for detecting myocardial infarction. My question is, do you think that this is also dependent on the size of the infarction? Did you have information on the size of the infarction, and whether if the infarction is very small, then it would be recommended to have more information and not just 3 derived leads?
For your question, yeah, I agree. So this 3-lead system depends on the detection will depend on the size of the MI infarction, and also in the locations and how. So when we were looking into localization and detection of MI, we saw that the distance between the leads we were proposing and the place of the infarction was relevant. So the closer, the better to detect MI. However, we were restricted in those databases about the kind of leads that we have. We had 12-lead ECG, and then we had to select. But I'm not saying this is the optimal one. So if we would have the same database with a body surface map, then I'm sure we will come with a different lead system. So yeah, I think the size of the infarction and the location impact the performance of the detection with 3 leads, with this 3-lead system. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And now moving for your proposed detection based on vectorcardiogram for the acute myocardial infarction. I saw that you found the standard deviation of the signals to be one of the most relevant features. And I want you to tell us whether you think that this is an artifact because the occlusion was made by angioplasty, by a balloon, and that this could be making this shift in the baseline, or this is something that would happen in a real case with a real occlusion in a patient.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Yeah, I think yeah, that's a very good question indeed. So I think this is an artificial MI. I agree. So we occlude during PTCA. So we occlude the artery, and then we produce an artificial ischemia. This is an old database, by the way. It was in the 90s. I don't think we can do this kind of test occluding 5 minutes in a real study nowadays. Anyhow, so the thing is, to validate the point, what we did is we looked into a different database from Physionet, that is the ST elevation database, and we compare the ST elevation in this database with the ST elevation that we had in our artificial ischemia scenario. And we saw that the ST elevation values in those 2 databases were the same. So therefore, the conclusion in this case was that the artificial ischemia that we get by occluding was reflecting from a ST elevation perspective. I cannot tell about the hormonal level and so on, but from a ST elevation perspective, the artificial ischemia was similar to the original or the real ischemia.
But did this standard deviation in the signal, not just in the ST elevation, occur also in this other database? I was curious about this.
Yeah, no, we didn't look into that because unfortunately in the database that we compare with, those are Holter monitors. Okay, so those have a different set of leads. And in our case, in our reduced lead ECG system, we had B1, B3, and lead 3. So we were able only to compare, I don't remember by heart, but we were able only to compare this in 1 lead. So when we were looking to a standard deviation in these models, we were looking at standard deviation in all the leads. So yeah, so it was difficult to do that. Yeah, so I didn't look into that. Yeah.
Okay, and my final question. So both for localization of the infarction, as you did in your last chapter, but also for other questions related to your thesis in general. So you are proposing to improve the detection of myocardial infarction, either in the acute phase or in the old phase. But can you say how much you improve over the current clinical practice, or is it something that should be tested in the future?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. It's a very good question. So what we saw is as well in the last chapter, when we test in the independent data set, okay, we saw that the models, the behavior is very different. So we might expect this in the clinical practice to behave in a different way, mainly because the prevalence as well in the clinical practice on MI events is different. So this is, if we want to get an assessment or to be more assured in the clinical practice, I think the next thing to do is to do a clinical study and look into that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Vos, Professor of Medical Physiology at Utrecht University Medical Center. Professor Vos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, dear candidate, I would like to congratulate you with your beautiful work, although perhaps I was missing a chapter. I think you could have added STV somewhere in the book as a final chapter or as an additional chapter. But that's not that important. I know you as a very competent guy that is very familiar with writing software and trying to analyze data. But as I mentioned before, I'm not completely convinced that you have the same knowledge about electrophysiology. So I have a simple and a difficult question. And of course I will start with a difficult one. Electrophysiology, dear candidate. You mentioned all those beautiful changes on the ECG, ST depression, ST elevation. Very simple one. Where do they come from? What is changing in the electrophysiology of the heart that STV elevation is appearing?
Yeah. Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for the question. It's indeed a difficult question and a very relevant one. So I will do my best to answer that. The changes that we see in the electrophysiology, in the ECG, comes indeed from electrophysiology changes. So what happens is when we have MI, and I'm not an electrophysiologist, so I will try to do the best I can. So when we have MI, there is a lack of oxygen in the tissue, and then the tissue is changing properties. At a cell level, there are changes in properties. And those changes, what is happening basically is if we look to the monophasic action potential, the normal cell will depolarize with a baseline of minus 90 millivolts, and then we'll get the depolarization. So what happens with MI is that this 90 millivolts baseline is increasing, and then the repolarization, the monophasic action potential is decreasing in amplitude. So this means that we have areas that are not coming to resting potential, and therefore we have a gradient that is reflecting in the elevation in the ST segment. Yeah.
And what about the duration of the action potential?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure I have a good answer for this. What I think the duration would be less of the action potential.
When the cell tries to survive, it stops contracting. So calcium-induced calcium release is no longer very important for the cell. So it also shortens, therefore, the action potential considerably. And indeed, with all, I mean, I think you have prepared this question a little bit. You came along quite well. And then I'm doing now the opposite. You are the expert, and I'm the layperson.
Oh.
And I was reading through the thesis, and then in each chapter, I had the impression, but I'm wrong, I know that, I had the impression that you are using a different database. Well, it is all PhysioNet, but you have LTST, you have STAF3, PTB-XL, PTB-DB, and you use 3 or 4 different references in the meaning. And I was wondering, can you explain to me what that database encompasses and what is happening with the different small versions?
Yep. Thank you very much for the question. That's a good question, indeed. So, all those, I know, all those names sounds kind of crazy, but yeah, those are different databases. So Physionet is a repository of databases that are open to the public. In our case, we didn't have any funding to do clinical studies or anything like that, so we hugely use those kind of resources. So indeed, there are different databases. So there are the PTB database. This is one in which we have 12 TCG and Frank's Vectorcardiography. So it's a good database to validate the synthesized BCG, because then we have the gold standard and we have the 12 TCG to derive the synthesized BCG. So then we have this other database, the STAF3 database, and this database is having patients that are eligible for PTCA, so percutaneous transluminal coronary angioplasty, so basically PTI, so to unblock those arteries, okay? So then what they did in this database, they occlude the artery for 5 minutes. And then they were observing how ischemia was going on. So this is a very suitable database for looking into acute setting, what happens when, in the early phase, how ischemia is evolving. Then the LTST, so this is the long-term ST elevation European database, I think, in Physionet. This is having real ST elevation. This we used kind of to validate the artificial ischemia, so we were concerned this is an artificial ischemia, we cannot make claims that this will be observed or is translatable to the clinical setting. So therefore, we look into this database to try to get this reference, this gold standard, and see if the behavior was similar. And then we have the PTB-XL, that is different from the PTB diagnostic database. So this is a big database in which there are a lot of recordings on MI. And when looking into location, the problem we were facing is that, as I mentioned, now if we want to look into the location, the task is much more challenging than doing just detection, where we have MI or non-MI. So therefore, we needed more data to build a model. And then we used this database that was not available when we started the research. Okay, so this database is having, I think, or was in Physionet since 2 years ago, so much earlier, so that when we started the research. Therefore, we use this PTB-XL database to look into that and to be able to have enough samples to detect or to localize MI properly. I hope I answered all the questions.
I thank you for your answers, dear candidate, and I would like to give the word back to the doctor.
The opposition will now be continued by Dr. Zarko Gianni, who is an assistant professor of human-centered AI at the Department of Advanced Computing Sciences of this university.
Thank you. Dear candidate, congratulations on your work. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very clear, and the contribution of your PhD is very clear. And I really like that you basically did multidisciplinary work, and this is nice, and it is evidence from both your presentation and the thesis. I have a few questions for you. So starting a little bit, moving towards the technical part of your work, I see there are some imbalances in the data sets that you are using, and you are splitting the data sets in training and testing. That means that in the training procedure, you are training the models with imbalanced data sets. That might cause overfitting. How did you address this issue?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for the question. It's a very good question, indeed. So we have imbalanced data set, indeed. So we ensure when we split the data set, we did 80%, 20%. So to try to avoid overfitting, what we did is we ensure that there were different patients in the test data set with respect to the training and validation. That's the first thing. And also that the proportion of MI and healthy controls was the same in both in the testing and the training and validation. So we did only one split, okay? So we were not doing like a key fold clustering and key fold testing and anything like that. And this is recognized like a challenge, but yeah, this is what we did to try to reduce overfitting and be sure that we were not overtraining the data.
Okay, so I see that you also used the area under the ROC curve as a criteria, that it is a reliable criteria in case of imbalances datasets. There are other criteria, F1 score, that you might consider using in the future. Thank you for the answer. Another question focuses on the explainability part that you mentioned in the end of your presentation. And I really like that you have clinical features, clinically relevant features. And this is an important thing in order to be able to explain the models. Have you tried some commonly used explanation techniques such as sublime in order to extract these feature importances, or in order to be able to see which of these features contributed more in the final decision of the model, and maybe identify some biases there? Have you at least performed some preliminary results? It was not in the focus, within the focus of your PhD. It can be considered also as a future work, but have you already might thought about it?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Yeah, so we coming to so what we did to try to come up with a feature that or the best features that in the model. So in the first chapter we use lasso. So lasso is a regularization technique. So by default, depending on the value of lambda that we select in the penalization term, we will get more or less features. Okay, so when following the lambda value, and seeing how the loss was changing, we selected the one that was optimal. Therefore, in that case, the number of features according to the lasso method was kind of optimal, minimal. And these were, we mentioned some of them that are the most important or most relevant features for detection. When we did also gradient boosting, you can interrogate the method as well, and it will rank the features on how much they reduce the variance when you include this feature. And therefore, we also use models in which we were selecting the most important ones, like 6 features to avoid overfitting. So we were not selecting all the features, so we were selecting the most important ones. And in the last case, we did the same. So in the last chapter on MI localization, we used the same thing with lasso, SVM, and gradient boosting.
So you didn't apply explainable techniques to explain the recurrent neural network in your last case. You applied this explainable technique in order to be able to identify the best features to be then inserted into the model.
Yeah.
Okay, so explainability in that part, in the feature, in the input space. It is also important to be able to generate some explanations of why the model resulted into this particular probability as a next step, as a future. And I like that you have these clinical relevant features, I'm saying it again, but also deep learning techniques could also be applied on the signal itself, because you already did some signal processing a priori, extracted those features, and then fed the models. You could also apply deep learning techniques on the original signal in order to generate more features and maybe combine them with the handcrafted features and maybe increase the accuracy of the models. Have you considered this? Do you think that it is a good future direction?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, very, very relevant. Yeah, indeed. So yeah, we didn't use AI techniques to derive features, but that's something we could do in the future. And the main reason, one of the reasons was when we started the research, as I said, it took me a long time to come here, so there were not a lot of AI. So in the 2016, AI was bumping up, and there were not really like a feature extraction from AI at that time, so we were doing this kind of work. But indeed, I agree. So we could include AI and combine with these kind of features and see, the increased value on that. Yeah.
Thank you. And one last question, and I think this will be the most difficult one from at least from my side, but it is highly relevant. So you are developing a decision support tool, basically. And when we are influencing clinical decision making, then we are subject to the AI Act regulations. So imagine this tool to be implemented in clinical practice, home monitoring, very nice, I like all these ideas. What about the regulations? I mean, AI Act basically regulates that kind of clinical decision support systems, and it is very hard to overcome. They do not let us do it unless it will receive a CE marking. Have you done some research in this field? Do you have an opinion? Because you did this in collaboration with Medtronic, if I...
thank you for...
You had some collaborations,
Yeah, thank you for the question. So just to be sure that I got it right, so it's about whether I think on regulation and how this method could be implemented according to regulations in the European Union, for example.
With respect to the regulations, yes.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Very good question indeed. So I did this research separate from Medtronic because I didn't want to get any IP problems when publishing. So this is not my area of research in Medtronic, so this is totally different. So yeah, that's a very good point. I think in the European Union, this would be easier than other kind of approaches to regulate because we can explain what the model is doing. So if there is a misclassification, then we can see where this misclassification is coming from. And then from a regulation perspective, I think if we do the proper clinical study, if we get the proper clinical evidence, I don't think would be a big problem from that point of view. As I said, because what we are doing is explainable, so we can, those are simple models, and then we can trace back if there is any. It's not like a black box. In that case, we know what is happening inside, and we can see where the problem is coming from. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Congratulations again.
Yeah, thank you.
The opposition will now be continued by Dr. Kevel, who is an assistant professor of bioinformatics at the Department of Advanced Computing Sciences of this university.
Dear candidate, thank you for an exceptionally clear thesis. I particularly enjoyed that you had these nice prologues at the start of every chapter, introducing it, leading the reader through what to expect. It made it very easy to read. I'd like to start by focusing on two of the methods that you used in different chapters for the similar reasons, the autoencoders and the principal component analysis, PCA. You referred to them both in your discussion as feature smoothing, and they both produce this lower dimensional representation of the data. They both reduce the noise in the data, and yet allow an accurate reconstruction of the original data. But in the chapter where you tried PCA, your conclusion was that it didn't help, it didn't work at all. But the chapter where you tried autoencoders resulted in improvements in many of the cases that you saw. Sometimes small improvements, but improvements. So any ideas what's going on here? Why these two methods? Is it just the different problems? Is it features of the different methods? Why are we seeing, for methods that have a similar purpose, such very different results?
Yeah, highly esteemed opponent. Thank you very much for the question. It's a good question. I will try to answer the best I can, okay? So when we use PCA in one of the problems, we were using the principal component. So if we decompose the signal in the principal components, okay? We were getting different longitudinal signals, and we were looking to the ECG signal, basically, okay? So we were not looking into features, just the signals. And what we realized in that sense, and why it was not helping, is because principal component analysis is looking to the variance, okay? So therefore, it will focus on the most energy components, the first one, okay? And then was selecting the QRS complex side of the cardiac cycle, like three principal components. So the energy in there were mainly coming from the QRS complex. While we know, according to the physiology, that the T-wave part, so the repolarization part of the cardiac cycle that is in the T-wave is having less energy, but is the one giving us the information for MI. And therefore, in that case, principal component was not working because the information that was extracting was from the QRS complex and not from the T-wave, that we know is not that relevant for the problem. Okay. And the second one we looked into PCA was about smoothing. And in that case, what we looked is into features. So we had values for the features, and we wanted to apply principal components to try to get the highest components on those features, which is not the longitudinal signal. And the purpose was a bit different in that sense, so those are different problems, yeah. And about the autoencoder, what we aim with the autoencoder is having two parts, the encoder and the decoder. So when we do the encoding part, we are forcing to get a shrink representation of the feature, okay? So we are enforcing to get a subset of features. And then when we are reconstructing, and we want this to be similar to this one, what we are ensuring is that the set of small features is getting all the information necessary to reconstruct the original data set, but the non-important features will be just smooth or reduced, and this is why we say it's smoothing.
Yeah.
I hope I answered correctly.
Thank you. A recurring theme I saw throughout your thesis was this idea of trying to represent the 12-lead data in 3 leads. We live in a world of big data.
Yeah.
Many companies, many applications, people believe more data is always better. Yet your thesis stands against this. It says, no, less data is enough. Less data can be better even. You show some times when the 3-lead version outperforms the 12-lead. Where do you think, do you see other places in life, in the world in general, in problems that you see around in data science, where we can learn from this example that less data is enough data?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. Yeah, I would love to answer this one. So I think, yeah, indeed, in life, and this is not different from life, I think less is more, okay? And what happens is that having more data, if you have the wrong data and you have noise, it's not going to give you better results. You have data quality, and you need to have the right data to start with, okay? So what we saw in MI localization is that indeed having less data was improving, basically because having less complexity, is improving. Having more data, I think, will help, but it's not only about the data. I think, as I said, it's about the quality of the data, how representative is this data from the problem you are trying to solve, and also how orthogonal is the data. It's not about having a bunch of a big data set. No, it's if they are all correlated or intercorrelated, you will do a poorly classification. So yeah, I think we tend to confuse and say, okay, and I've seen this many times also with colleagues, they say, okay, just give me the data and I will bring you the result. And it's not, is this data is suitable for the problem you are trying to solve? And then it's having the right quality, and so on. So I think it's not just about having big data, yeah.
So then is there a big difference between having more features and having more samples? In big data?
Right. I think there is a difference. So having more samples, if the quality is good, I think is better, but they are not incompatible, And having more features is not necessarily better, because then you increase the complexity of the model, and then you can overfit by doing that. And indeed, Lasso is doing very well in that. So Lasso, you put a lot of features, and we regularize and get the features that are more relevant for the problem. So it's not having more features is good, but always that they are relevant. And having more samples, if quality is good and is for the right problem, I think is always helping. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So then, when you were looking at this going from 12 leads to 3 leads in chapter 3, you looked at it in terms of the prediction accuracy. But you conclude because the prediction accuracy stays the same or even gets better, that there's no information loss. Does it matter if information is lost? Is that really a measure of information loss?
Yeah. Okay, we can take this after reception, or I can answer if you want now, as you wish.
At the reception.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Alfonso Aranda, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense, and I request that you and your company await our return in this room for the results of our deliberations.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prorector.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if there's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the line, I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if there's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. The mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. South side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if there's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if there's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Alfonso Aranda. The degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Dr. Bonizzi is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
All right, please.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principle of scientific integrity at all times? To be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority vested in us by the law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Alfonso Raúl Aranda Hernández, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university.
Thank you very much.
Dear Dr. Alfonso, I am, and we are, very happy for you today and for this great achievement. So, also on behalf of your other supervisor, Ralph and Joel, congratulations. I would like also to extend our congratulations to your wife and your children at home, which I think we are following us online.
No, should be.
We have known each other for many years now, since you started working at the Medtronic Bakken Research Center here in Maastricht several years ago. We started to collaborate together with supervising bachelor's and master's students working on their research project at Medtronic. Eventually, your curiosity, your enthusiasm, and passion for science brought you to explore the opportunity to carry out a PhD at our Department of Advanced Computing Sciences. You started your PhD with us back in 2015, with the plan to work on artificial intelligence systems for automatic diagnosis of cardiac diseases. In particular, you wanted to focus on improving early disease detection, while at the same time developing low-cost tools to address a bigger population and answer to the needs of emerging markets where access to resources and cardiologists is limited. During the years, we saw you growing into mature and independent researchers, and a data scientist and AI expert. And your colleagues and people around you also got to appreciate more and more your scientific skills. This also opened up the opportunity for you to move to the US, where you started working as a principal data scientist at the Medtronic headquarters in Minneapolis. And after moving to the US, you had to balance additional responsibility at work with your PhD project and with a different time zone. You managed regular online meetings with your supervisor at 5 or 6 in the morning, weekends and nights of work to carry out on with your PhD project, and comply with scientific journals and conferences deadline. And you always did so with a smile on your face and with kindness and a positive attitude, even when facing tough reviews and going through the 4th or 5th revision of a manuscript. We are going to miss your positive attitude. You had to face several challenges on the way. As all of us, you had to face COVID, and you had to find a way to stay focused and motivated in your PhD while dealing with social isolation and other difficulties. But what I think is the biggest challenge of all is that you actually pursue your PhD next to a full-time job at Medtronic. Now, for those of you who may not know, we consider already a PhD a full-time job. And yes, it may have taken more years than a regular PhD project, but you managed it. And this shows all your strength, determination, and perseverance. I honestly don't know many people that could have pulled this off. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the member of the assessment committee, the member who took the time to join us online, the member who traveled to Maastricht today for this event, the chair of the committee, and all the other members as well. I would like to thank the prorector and also the people who attended this event, family and friends who may be following us online, and all family, friends, colleagues, and your colleagues from Medtronic here today. Congratulations again, Alfonso, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Dear Dr. Aranda, also on behalf of Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the doctorate degree that you have just required. And my congratulations also go to your supervisors, your family, and your friends and colleagues. Now, before I close this meeting, I would like to thank all members of the degree committee, and especially those coming from far. Your participation is much appreciated, no matter whether you are on site or online. After closing this meeting, we will all go to the reception in the refectory elsewhere in this building, where you can all congratulate the new doctor. However, before we do so, we will use the opportunity to take some pictures with the candidate and the full degree committee, including our online member. But first, before we close the internet connection, let me offer our online member the opportunity to congratulate our candidate, Professor Guillem.
Yeah, congratulations, Alfonso.
Muchísimas gracias.
Okay, thank you all very much for attending this historic event for Alfonso Raúl Aranda Hernández, and I now close this academic meeting.